the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week.
Hi, this is Dr. Jeffrey Gurian from New York City, also known as the Doctor of Happiness, and I want to welcome you to Business Story of the Week.
Fantastic. And that is the man himself, the Doctor of Happiness. And he's our guest for today. My name is Joshua, of course. I am your host. And we always kick off, the question or the show with a riveting question. The question for today is, what's funnier, life itself or the way we try to make sense of it? Well, Dr. Jeffrey is the perfect man to answer that question. Dr. Jeffrey Gurian is the true Renaissance man, known for his eclectic career as a cosmetic dentist, clinical professor, energy healer, comedy writer, performer, and producer. He has worked with legendary comedians like Rodney Dangerfield and Joan Rivers, produced comedy events with stars such as Kevin Hart, developed his own healing modality called star therapy. As a best-selling author, motivational speaker, and a former stutterer who cured himself, Dr. Jeffrey has inspired many through his work in both comedy and healing, and today he is going to be sharing his story and his perspective with us. Dr. Jeffrey, what is funnier, life itself, or how do we make sense of it?
That's such an insightful question, and it's one of the things that makes comedians funny, because we see life in a very different way. We see the many levels. What makes comedy funny is that we talk about things that everyone else can relate to, that they take for granted. Like, for instance, I say pants are important, and then I talk about pants, but I talk about ripped jeans. The whole world is wearing ripped jeans, right? The truth is that ripped jeans are just torn pants, right? So if you went into a store and you saw a sign that said sale, torn pants, there's a good chance you wouldn't buy them, right? Because
Absolutely.
Torn pants sounds like an accident. If you fell down in the street and tore your pants, you think, maybe I should go home and change. I have a hole in my pants. But if you tear them on purpose, now it's time to hit the clubs.
There you go. There you
Have
go.
a lot of fun. So comedians see the world in a different way. Everybody takes ripped jeans for granted. The whole world is wearing ripped jeans. But when you think about it, it's a silly thing to do. Why do you wear a piece of clothing that's all ripped up, right?
Purposefully.
Purposefully, yeah, on purpose. And designers are laughing their butts off because the more ripped up they are, the more expensive they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
I saw a girl last week just wearing pockets. That's all that was left, just pockets. Both legs were completely gone, just $1,000, right? 1,000. So your question is very interesting, because that's essentially how comedians see the world. We look at the world and we see things that other people take for granted, but we see the humor in them.
Absolutely.
And life in general is funny if you have the right perspective. If you're willing to engage in positive thinking. After the last 4 years, the whole world is under a lot of stress, starting with the pandemic. I was in the hospital in March of 2020 when COVID first came out. Well, as you can tell, I'm a trendsetter. I went right out and got COVID. I don't want to wait. I went out and got it immediately, and I wound up with COVID double pneumonia. I guess single pneumonia wasn't good enough for me. I had to get double pneumonia.
Gosh.
I'm laughing about it now, but it was a nightmare. It was very scary. It was March of 2020. New York City was the epicenter of the virus. And I had to fight very hard. I had to do what I write about in my books. You can't just walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk. You have to walk the walk, too. And I had to fight to stay positive, because when you're in a negative state, your immune system does not function as well. It's very hard to fight off infection. When you're in a positive state, your vibration is high, and your immune system functions much better. And people don't, it's all about energy. When you
Of
walk into
course.
a room, if you walk into a crowded room and there's one person there who's very angry, you can feel it. You feel the energy. And
Yes,
it's
of
the
course.
same thing. If people are happy, you can also feel the energy. We vibrate at certain frequencies. When you're happy, you're vibrating at a high frequency.
Yes, of course.
When you're sad or depressed, you're vibrating at a low frequency. So,
Yes, of course.
what I talk about, my goal, my personal goal, is always to put out positive energy to the universe,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what I'm doing. When I was a cosmetic dentist, when I was a professor at NYU, I was treating stress related illness like migraine headaches, and I was treating them with just energy, just my hands, no injections, no medication, because I'm a very strong believer in energy, in the chakra system.
Right.
Are you familiar with that a
Absolutely.
little bit?
Yes, I am.
With
A little bit.
chakras and energy. As a matter of fact, last month in July, I was the keynote speaker at the Minneapolis Convention Center to
Wow.
500 doctors. It was for the Academy of General Dentistry, and I was the keynote speaker, and that's a lot about what I talked about. They were interested
Interesting.
in how I mixed my career with humor, because humor is very important. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I love that. And of course, we mentioned that earlier that you are the energy healer and you combine humor and laughter when it comes to healing as well. First off, I want to highlight that a little bit because you just had to be cool, right? You just had to be cool right away. You had to be twice as cool and you had to get pneumonia twice. You had to get COVID twice.
Pneumonia, right?
You had to get it twice. You had to be twice as cool as everyone else. Set the trend and like that. But again, Dr. Jeffrey, you talked about it's a nightmare, but you had to go through it with positivity. You had to go through it with fun and laughter, and you set the backdrop perfectly when it comes to comedy. Because I truly agree with what you said that comedians see life differently in the way that life is suffering. Life is pretty tough. Like life is kind of shit, to be honest. So excuse my French.
Life is a death sentence.
It truly is.
It
It is.
truly is. It's a
So
death
how
sentence.
do you receive a death sentence from birth, but how do you laugh your way through it? I think it's a challenge for most of us, right?
Well, I'll give you another example. In
Please.
2015, I had a heart attack. Came out of nowhere. I had never been sick a day in my life.
What? What?
I had a very serious heart attack, the one they call it the widowmaker heart attack,
Wow.
and it's a crazy story. The night before, like I was on Sirius XM, is a very big radio station. I don't know
Yes,
if you
very
live
big.
in Philadelphia.
Serious? Uh-huh. Yep.
Right. I was on there for 2 years. The night before I got sick, we were out partying, having a great time. The next day, I get this heart attack, and it was a very serious heart attack. I didn't realize it at the time, but this amazing doctor was able to put a stent in and save me. And I was back on stage performing 5 days later. And the owner of the comedy club said to me, "What, are you crazy? You just had a heart attack." And
Yes, exactly.
I was like, "Yeah, but it's hard to get a spot here. I didn't want to lose my spot." And I'll tell you something even more. They wheeled me down to the emergency room, to the operating room, and I wasn't completely asleep, and I felt them unplugging my heart.
No.
And
Oh my
I
God.
said to the doctor on the operating table, I said to the surgeon, "I feel you in my heart, not in a romantic way, but I feel you in my heart." And the whole surgical team started to laugh. And he said, "I'll give you more anesthetic." And he came to my room later and he hugged me. And he said
Oh,
to
wow.
me, "I want you to know that you're a miracle." He said, "In my 30 years of being a heart surgeon, no one has ever joked with me on the operating table when
That's
I
too
was
funny.
working on their heart." And I
That's too
said,
funny.
"I have to do that. That's my nature,
Mm.
is to try to look for the positive, because from a spiritual point of view, Joshua, I had to realize that that was my path.
That's
You
true.
know,
Okay.
there's a
Wow.
tendency when something like that happens, there's a tendency to think to yourself, why me, right?
Hmm.
Why is this happening to me?
Hmm.
But the spiritual answer is, why not me? Whoever
I
promised me
love
that
that.
my life is supposed to be perfect and that
Why
nothing
not
is
me?
supposed to happen to me? So I had to remind myself of that while I'm laying there. First, obviously, it's a very scary situation because
Of
you
course.
don't know what's going to happen to you.
Yes, of
But I
course.
had to remind myself, for whatever reason, this is my path,
Hmm.
and I have
Hmm.
to deal with it. I have to be present for it, and I have to try to stay positive. I never let myself thinking maybe I'm going to die. I just kept thinking of all the things that I wanted to do. When they wheeled me into the hospital for the COVID thing, they put me in a cubicle next to a woman who was screaming, literally screaming with every breath that she took.
Whoa.
And I was hoping that they would move me because I was so sick. I had been sick for 2 weeks before I called an ambulance, and there was no place to put me. They ran out of rooms. And
Mm,
I'll tell you what I had to do. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, I had to think of that woman who was screaming and think of how scared she must be or how much pain she must be in to be in that state, to be screaming. I had to not stop thinking about myself and think about somebody else, which honestly was not easy to do.
of course.
And they were thinking of sending me home until they x-rayed my lungs. And a pulmonary specialist came in. He said, "I'm sorry to tell you, you have COVID double pneumonia. We're going to find a room for
Gosh.
you." And
Wow.
they emptied the cancer ward, and they moved the cancer patients someplace else, and they made room for the people with COVID. And it was a
Wow.
crazy time. But those are the things that I have to have done, that I have to shift my thinking, to take control of my mind. It's how I stopped stuttering. I stuttered very badly for so many years. I started stuttering when I was 6 or 7 years old, and I stuttered through my 20s and beyond. I could never even say my name. I could never say Gurian. And
How did
now,
you get that? How did you get through that?
how did I get through it? Very, very difficult. I took my mind apart. No one was able to help me. And I realized one day that I didn't stutter when I was alone. I only stuttered when I was trying to talk to somebody else. And
Interesting.
I consider it grace, Joshua. I figured out you can't have a disability based on your location. If a man has a limp, he limps in every room of his house. He can't go into a room and close the door and walk perfectly. But if I could speak fine when I'm alone, then theoretically it means there's nothing wrong with me. And
Of
so
course.
I started my journey on understanding what thoughts I was holding that were not valid for me. And I realized that every one of us, everyone in the world, including you and I, are
Yes.
holding thoughts that are not valid for us. And they're
So they're not
usually
valid.
negative thoughts that we collect from childhood. I
Of
call
course.
them heart wounds.
Of course.
And we need to release them. So I worked on myself for many years. And as you can see, I no longer stutter. Not only
I
don't
love
I
that.
stutter, but you can't even shut me up. I talk a lot.
Exactly, Doc. Doc, exactly. I mean, we're having this conversation right now, but at the same time, it's like I can listen to you all day as well, right? You give these insights that, to me, I feel is valuable and perspective that isn't quite common. It's quite unique as well. But doctor, before we start getting deep into it, I'd love to talk about the chakras, the energies that you talk about, and the healing as well. But before we get into that, I wanted to lay out a bit of a foundation. What do you think is the connection between laughter and healing, and why is it so important again to go through life having that positivity and learning to laugh, make humor out of getting heart surgery, things like that? And how do you get the strength out of that, of course? But I think the more important question is, what do you think is the connection between laughter and healing?
Well, they say that laughter is the best medicine. I'm in a group, I'm on the board of this group called Laugh MD,
Mm,
and we bring comedy to people in hospitals and people in recovery who are struggling with alcoholism and drug addiction. And when you're laughing, you release endorphins. Endorphins are the pleasure chemical.
yes, of
The only
course.
way to get it is eating chocolate or having sex or laughing. The easiest one to do is laughing, right? So
Easiest.
chocolate is not that great for you, and sex we won't talk about. So, laughter, it's true that it's the best medicine
Mm,
when, and it's also a healing force. It brings the whole world together. I have a friend, I always talk about him, Russell Peters. He's a comedian, he's an Indian comedian
mm.
who's from Canada, and his audience is multicultural. He fills Madison Square Garden. 20,000 people come out to see
Wow.
him. People of all backgrounds, from all different nationalities, religions, cultures. Everybody's laughing together. To me, that's the essence of comedy. That's where the healing comes from. It brings the whole world together. If you allow yourself to be open and to laugh, if you can laugh at yourself, these days people are offended so easily.
Yeah. Yes.
Right now, there are people sitting at home waiting to be offended by something. And I always say, listen, use your intuition. You
Yes.
can tell if a person is coming from love or a place of hate. It's
Yes, of course.
obvious. People know
Obvious.
this,
I agree.
but this whole cancel culture is ruining things for people. It's very hard in comedy. I always watch what I say. I don't do any controversial comedy. I don't talk about politics or religion, but you know, I had a Chinese girlfriend for many years, and her English was terrible. And it gave me a lot of jokes, but I would always say positive things that Chinese people are the smartest people in the world. They
Mm.
have to be because they figured out how to speak Chinese because it's very hard. It's very hard to do. Most people can't do it. But if you go to China, even little kids are speaking Chinese, 2, 3 years old. They're geniuses. No one else can do that. So, I say very positive things about people,
Hmm. Hmm.
and sometimes I don't even do those jokes because people are so sensitive, and it's terrible. It's really affecting things. But again, to your question, comedy is definitely a healing force. There's an energy when you're on stage and you're making people laugh, which by the way is the hardest thing in the world to do, to go out on stage and try to convince total strangers that what you think
Absolutely.
is funny is funny. It's a very
Hmm.
hard thing to do. But
Hmm. I agree.
you're putting out energy and the audience is putting out energy and your energies combine. And that's why
I
people
love
love
that.
to go to comedy shows and laugh.
I love that. And I love comedies, of course. I love stand up. I haven't met anyone who doesn't love stand up comedy, but I think I've met people who doesn't have that sense of humor. That's why if you don't enjoy comedy, I'm like, wow, what a sad life.
Right.
Like you can't even enjoy that. If you can't enjoy that, I love that you talk about energy all the time. I love that you also said it in a way where those energies combine, especially in stand up, especially, they combine, and I think it amplifies everything. That's why people love it. And the healing is so much more because we make sense of all this suffering and make sense of all the death sentence, so to speak. Dr. Jeffrey, you talk a lot about energy. You talk about, of course, you talk about this as well in healing your heart, by the way. And also you talk about this in that's your book right there, healing your I love that cover. Look at that cover.
Meditating dog, right?
There
Yeah.
you go, there you go.
Very hard to get a dog to sit in lotus position, by the way. Very hard.
And of course, this is also part of your modality in star therapy. Dr. Jeffrey, please go deeper into that when it comes to blending humor and spirituality. What is the secret through laughing through life's toughest challenges? How do you even find that strength to find that positivity in the face of very difficult challenges?
That question is what led me to write my third happiness book. I have 8 books, five
Wow.
on comedy,
Mm.
3 on happiness, mindset, and changing negative thinking to positive thinking. When I was recovering from COVID, I was in the house for months. I was literally afraid to go in the street after I recovered because it was a very scary time. New York, the streets were empty. Whoever was out was wearing masks. Nobody knew what to do. And I wanted to take a negative and turn it into a positive. So I wrote
Mhm.
my last book, which is called Facing Adversity, Stories of Courage and Inspiration. And it's true stories that I collected over 20 years, Joshua. I've always been fascinated by people who draw on an inner strength, very often an inner strength that they don't even know they have. And, in my story, so my case was stuttering, which was minor compared to the stories in this book. In
Yes,
1999, I started cutting out these stories from newspapers and magazines. I'll give you a little taste. A little three-year-old
please.
boy, a little 3-year-old boy was playing hide and seek, and he
Mm.
hid behind a tractor, and he put his hands in the motor, and it cut off his hands. And
Ooh.
his father was a surgeon who saw this happen, but he
Mhm.
wasn't that kind of surgeon. He raced the little boy to the hospital, and it was a holiday, and there were no transplant surgeons available. So the father had no choice. He assembled a surgical team, and he worked on the little boy for about 10 hours, and he reattached his hands, and they put them in
Wow.
casts. And after a couple of months, they took off the casts, and the hands were alive, but they weren't functional. The transplants
Right.
took, but they weren't functional. The grandfather was a martial artist, and he trained that little boy growing up every day use his hands. And today, that little boy is a famous spinal surgeon, and he runs the
What?
surgery clinic at a hospital in Colorado. That story blew me away. I couldn't,
It is
when
mind blowing.
I checked it out. It's real, and that's a miracle from God. And
Mm.
for someone, he wanted to be a hand surgeon. Now, I've done surgery, and I know what a steady hand you have to have. To do
Absolutely.
spinal surgery is one of the most complex kind of surgeries that you can do. You have to have
Mm.
an amazingly steady hand. To have your
Yes.
hands cut off and then become the head of surgery in a hospital is
It's,
mind-boggling.
it's
The other
remarkable.
story was a man born with no arms and legs. And he's a famous man, no arms and no legs. And his name is Nick Vujicic. Saw him since on television, but I read his story. When he was 10 years old, he thought of committing suicide because of the bullying that he was getting. And thank God he didn't do that. Today, he's an internationally known motivational speaker.
Yep.
He travels the
Yep.
whole world. He's married to a beautiful woman, and he has 4 children. And the singles bars are filled
Lovely.
with tall,
Yep.
handsome guys with all their limbs, with arms and legs, who can't get a date. And this man has no arms and legs, and he's got a beautiful wife and 4 children
Yes, of
because they
course.
draw on this inner strength. They don't let obstacles get them down. And
I
I
love that.
admire
I
that
love that.
so much that that's
These
what
stories,
inspired me to write that book.
I love that because these stories are what inspire us. So you're drawing from that inner strength that we all have in us, right? Like, I mean, first of all, like, what's your excuse? Like, if Nick could do it, like no arms, no legs, if he could do it, how can we do it? But, Doc, I feel like it still goes back to that same question. How do we even draw from that inner strength? What is
Now,
that inner strength and how?
sorry, please
Go ahead, go
finish.
ahead.
No,
Yeah,
I was going to
like,
not everyone has that inner strength. That's the problem. Some people are crushed by their obstacles. Some people, look, there are stutterers that I come across who never do anything. They never get a good job. They never get a date because they're afraid to talk to people because they stutter so badly. Many stutterers live in a negative world. They don't believe that they can get better. I was obsessed
interesting,
with curing myself. I wouldn't accept
interesting,
anything less. I knew I wanted to be a doctor, and who wants to go
interesting.
to a stuttering doctor? It makes you look
Of course.
nervous. So I was determined to cure myself, and I wouldn't accept anything less. The people who I wrote about all had major obstacles, missing arms and legs, and horrible things happened to them. And they drew on some inner strength that they didn't even know they had sometimes. When you face an obstacle, you have a choice to make, a subconscious choice. Can I get over this? Can I rise above this, or am I
Yes,
going to let this determine the rest of my life?
I love that.
And some people find this inner strength that most people don't even know they have. If your life is going fine, you don't need that inner strength. You don't know you have it. It's only when it feels like things are horrible that you find out that you have this inner strength. And if you can tap into it, you can find something good. You know, one of the lectures that I do, like this coming Friday, I'm lecturing for a whole weekend at the Omega Institute of Holistic Studies in Rhinebeck, New York, upstate New York. I would invite you, but you're in the Philippines. But it's the place where Deepak Chopra speaks, and
Yes,
the
yes.
late Wayne Dyer and Marianne Williamson. It's a big honor to me, all these leaders in consciousness. And I talk about don't believe your thoughts. Just because you think it doesn't make it real.
Yes, of course.
Many people have negative thoughts about themselves. And then we're talking about fear. Fear is a bully that tells you that you'll never be successful. It's the
Hmm,
little
hmm.
part of your brain that talks to you, that tells you that you're not enough, that you're not smart enough, that you're not rich enough, that you're not tall enough, that you're not whatever. And that they're all lies. It's not true. But we listen to it, and it gives people doubts.
I love
And
that.
fear is a bully that wants you to stay in bed with the covers over your head. And I say, You have to yell at the fear. F you to the fear. You can't let the fear get the best of you. So when I work with stutterers, I tell them you have to make that voice a whisper. Because if you were in a crowd, if you were in a big crowd and somebody was whispering to you, there's a good chance you wouldn't hear what they were saying and you could ignore them. And that's
Yes.
what you have to do with that piece of your subconscious mind. You have to make it a whisper. That's
Yes.
the work that I do, to teach people to think that way, to ignore those negative thoughts and to change them to positive thoughts.
Wow.
And
Wow. I
to me,
love that.
that's fascinating. So that's what I'm doing this weekend.
And I love that I love that you invited us to that lecture, of course. But Dr. Jeffrey, of course, for everyone else who is interested in what you're talking about, if this resonates with you, the website is jeffreygurian.com. Go check that out, and of course, make sure to grab a copy of Dr. Jeffrey's book, Healing Your Heart. And of course, there's many other books out there. Dr. Jeffrey, where else can we find you? Where else can we connect with you?
If they like comedy, they can look on my website at comedymatterstv.com.
Wow, I
And
love
on
that
that
name.
site, it's not only comedy, there's a whole section on spirituality and healing, on stuttering, on headache therapy, because that's what star therapy is about. It's a very gentle system of talk and touch to take away migraine headaches that come from grinding the teeth. When people are stressed out, very often they clench and grind their teeth and they don't know that that can cause terrible headaches. And a lot of people wake up in the morning and their neck hurts. They feel tight and achy, and they don't know that it's from their jaw because they're clenching and grinding their teeth. So it goes undiagnosed. Most doctors don't know about that. So
Wow.
on Instagram, I'm at Jeffrey Gurian, Gurian, Jeffrey. A lot of people are spelling it wrong these days. I'm just going to show my books, Healing
There
Your
you
Heart
go.
by Changing Your Mind, a spiritual and humorous approach to achieving happiness.
Mm.
Then was Fight the Fear,
Fight the Fear. I love
overcoming,
that one.
overcoming obstacles that stand in your way.
Mm.
And the last one was Facing Adversity, Stories of Courage and Inspiration. True
Wow, I love
stories
those.
of people. If anyone is ever feeling sorry for themselves, that's the book to read, to show you how people can overcome terrible obstacles to lead happy, meaningful lives.
Mhm.
And I'm very grateful that we had a chance to talk about all these things, Joshua.
Absolutely, and I am grateful as well, Doctor. I mean, this is a very, very fascinating perspective that you've shared to us, but also very important. I think it's a very, very important, crucial life skill to be able to laugh at things and heal yourselves, not just through laughter, but also overcoming the fears that we've set for ourselves.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm
Dr. Jeffrey,
very grateful for the time, and I'm glad we finally got together.
I'm glad. I'm glad that we finally got this together. I'm very, very happy about that one. Of course, again, to all our audience and listeners out there, go check out jeffreygurian.com. We'll have those links down below. And of course, Dr. Jeffrey's books as well. Go grab yourselves a copy. Thank you for watching the episode.
I
Dr.
want to
Jeffrey,
see,
anything else? Go ahead.
I want to see one last thing. If there's anybody listening who stutters, I have a special website for stutterers, and you can look at it
Wow.
and see it and see if it makes sense to you.
Mhm.
I always tell people, don't just call me, but if it has to make sense to you to understand that you can get better and stop stuttering. The website is stopstutteringnow.gurian.com. Stop Stuttering Now Gurian, Gurian.com. And my contact information is on there. I always welcome emails from people. It's Jeffrey at jeffreygurian.com. And if you have any questions or anything, you can feel free to email me, and I answer people really pretty quickly. So, again,
Absolutely.
thank you for letting me add that on. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And again, to our audiences and listeners, if you know anyone who stutters, get to that website Dr. Jeffrey just mentioned. If any of this resonates with you, let your friends know, let your families know. Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey, and thank you to our audience and listeners out there. Thank you for watching the episode. We will see you on the next one. Bye bye.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.